Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is the monthly wrap-up for July of 2023. So I'm just going to very quickly go through the books that I read in the month of July 2023. All of these books I have talked about in more detail in previous videos. In this case, either in Fresh Read Kills videos, where I talk more at length about my thoughts about things I've recently read, or in the Book Trek videos, a annual event in which we read Star Trek fiction. I got 2 Star Trek books that I read this month. So if you want more in-depth thoughts from me about any of these, you can go into those videos. This is just going to be a very quick summary. And I'm starting off with 2 books that I started the month with that I just didn't really like. The first one is Huns Majars. This is something that looked really promising, something that I'm really interested in. Really cool illustrations, and I thought, oh, cool, a nice illustrated history of basically the Magyars, the Hungarians, especially. But this ended up being not what I thought. There's a lot of pseudo-history in this, a lot of kind of repurposed history in the working in the service of nationalism. So I did not end up liking this. I would not recommend it at all. And it is something I will be passing along to somebody who is just kind of morbidly curious about this as well. But no, this was a no for me, unfortunately. The other thing that I had read was contemporary Costa Rican poetry, a biannual anthology that's put out by University Presses. And I read this because I am participating, it's still going on, the Women's World Cup. Mark over at Book Time with Elvis, this is I think the 4th time he's run it. Basically a readathon that coincides with a major soccer event. So in this case, it's the Women's World Cup. And if you want to participate, he draws randomly one of the countries that's participating, and that's your country. And you read something from or about that country. And then if that country is defeated by another country, you read something from or about them. You just kind of follow things along. If your country gets knocked out, you follow the country that knocked them out. And so in the end, everybody that's participating will be reading something from the country that won everything. So I got Costa Rica, and I found this fairly inexpensive on Amazon, and I like poetry, but I can't say I was really impressed by most of the poems. There was a few that I liked, but wasn't too crazy about it, and there was an odd choice, I would say, when it comes to one of the translations that I didn't quite understand. So, I will admit that I'm just not that much for a lot of contemporary poetry as it is. So this was kind of a dud overall for me as well. But then things got a lot better. I read Wordhord, Daily Life in Old English by Hannah Videen. I read this as a buddy read with David Wiley, another booktuber. And we both love, Old English language, the Anglo-Saxon world. We both like Beowulf. And this was a great book. I really like this. So she essentially is looking at Old English vocabulary, Old English words. We don't get too much into grammar, but she translates those words for us, and we kind of trace, if we can, those words through history, how they've gotten to us. But more importantly, we see what those words tell us about what it was like to be in Anglo-Saxon England. Like, what sort of perspective does it give us to understand how the Anglo-Saxons saw the world? This was put out by Princeton University Press, and I think that I love this cover design, and I think that it's just a beautifully presented book as well. I'm really glad that I have a nice hardcover physical copy of this. We really enjoyed this. I have a couple examples of things that I liked in my video that I made about this, one of the Fresh Read Kills videos, but we both, David and I, really like this, and certainly one that I'm going to come back to and read again. So that's the Wordhord. Then I read Shiloh, a novel by Shelby Foote. I read this for Booktube at War. This is the first year it happened in July, where we read books basically dealing with war. Could be fiction or nonfiction. I read one of each, and this was the fiction one. So this was originally published in 1952 by Shelby Foote, who's known for his Civil War writing, known as quite a raconteur, and somebody who, really people tend to really like when they saw him in Ken Burns' The Civil War documentary. And I like this overall. He does a great job of putting us in the thick of the battle when it's happening. And there's some really nice turns of phrase, really nice writing. I did say in my review that we can still see a lot of influence from the Lost Cause in here. Slavery is almost not at all mentioned. I think there's one brief mention of it, and it's basically, I didn't quite remember what it was when I did my video on it, but now I'm remembering. It talks about how there was uh, I guess, a minor Confederate officer who the soldiers didn't like because he was a slave trader. It's kind of like, okay. Um, but that's like the only mention that we get of this sort of thing. It's, we get the Southern cause as being one just about like liberty and rights. And so you can read this with get a better understanding, I guess, of how the battle happened, but you won't understand why the battle happened at all from this. So give and take kind of creates a middle of the road thing for me. If you're not somebody who cares about that sort of thing, you won't be bothered by it. But I am somebody who is sensitive to that, and I'm always I always kind of have my guard up with lost cause narratives coming in, and it's definitely somewhat here, but it's not bad. It doesn't ruin it to the point where you can't enjoy the novel. So that's Shelby Foote's Shiloh. Let me see. I read, also for Booktube at War, John Keegan's The Face of Battle. The study of Agincourt, Waterloo, and the Somme. And essentially, he is trying to give us an idea about what battle would have been like for the soldier during all three of these conflicts. And he also takes it beyond as well, past those conflicts into what was present day for him was 1970s when this was published. But I thought this was great. Really good insight. He does a really good job using evidence and primary sources, personal accounts, to give us the flavor of really what it was like, what they were up against, why it was like that. And I just think that this was a wildly successful book in that way. I definitely want to read some more Keegan. So really like this. Highly recommend it. And I also read Hangman's Diary. The Journal of Master Franz Schmidt, Public Executioner of Nuremberg, 1573 to 1617. So this was originally published in the 1920s. The first half is essays, giving us some background into the legal world of the late medieval, early modern society. Basically how these people would have come to the executioner, what the executioner's job was, what his position in society would have been. And that's all really interesting in its own right. And then the second half is Schmidt's actual diary. And I will say it's not a complete diary. I mean, they're basically selecting for us. But at that point, the interest isn't necessarily in the executions. It's more in the crimes and what people are accused of. And it gives us an interesting window into the social history of the time period. So I would recommend this. It's a pretty quick read. It doesn't take long to get through. The font is quite large. I did like this. I like this quite a bit. I mean, you're gonna know what you're getting into. You're getting into basically a list, an inventory. But if you have a certain imagination like I do, and you're willing to basically use it to try and figure out some things he's talking about, I think that you would really enjoy this if you're that kind of person. And then I read 2 books for Book Trek 2023, where we are reading Star Trek fiction in June, July, and August. So the summer of Trek. And I read 2 for this month. The first one I read was Enterprise, What Price Honor by Dave Stern. And this was I guess sort of a mystery novel in which we have the character of Malcolm Reed, who's there on this very, very boring cover. As mentioned in my video when I talk about this, I hate covers like this. But it certainly doesn't give you an indication that this is actually a pretty well done book. And it's got 2 different timelines that it's kind of jumping back and forth with that end up sort of converging in the end. And that's always a narrative technique I've always really enjoyed. But they do a good job with this character of Malcolm Reed and the mystery as it's unfolding. It's all really well done. I really ended up liking this one quite a bit. And I also like this, Unification, the novelization of the 2-part episode from The Next Generation. This one written by Jeri Taylor. And it's a two-part episode that I think is pretty solid. It's where Spock basically meets Picard. And I thought this novelization was quite good. I think that Jeri Taylor, who was also heavily involved in production of the show, she is maybe able to give the characters a little more personality, a little bit more insight. I don't just mean the next gen characters. I mean a lot of the side characters end up showing up. Cameos and characters that show up very briefly in the episode. She can kind of flesh out and give us some background to their lives. And I think if you like that two-part episode from the show, I think that you would enjoy this novelization. So those are the books that I read. I said this is going to be a very quick summary. See if I can create a pile here. I think it was a pretty good reading month for me, at least. I'm hoping to have another one next month. I'm recording this in August, so I guess the month of August I'm hoping to be as good as July. So the bottom two I don't recommend. We got Huns Majars, contemporary Costa Rican poetry. I recommend all the rest though. We've got the Wordhord by Videen, Shiloh by Shelby, Foote, John Keegan's The Face of Battle, A Hangman's Diary, Franz Schmidt, and we've got an Enterprise novel by Dave Stern, What Price Honor, and Unification, adapted by Jeri Taylor. If you've read any of these, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and as always, thank you, Booktube.